Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. In today's episode, we speak with Neil Evely. He's the global head of innovation for Helo, a production company I am signed with as part of a duo called Lola Tango with my directing partner, Eve Weston. When we met Neil as he joined Helo, he told us about his love of cinema and how he is enjoying sharing his passion with his son. And I just knew he was a perfect guest for Raising Cinephiles. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and I'm here today with Neil Evely, who is the global head of innovation at Helo and also a cinephile starting his career in animation and production and VFX, and also a new friend. I'm so excited to welcome you here to Raising Cinephiles.
Thank you, Jessica. This is very cool. This is as I've mentioned before, this is my first ever podcast, and I can't think of a topic that would be the best one to start with, so I'm thrilled.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll kick us off with my first question, which is, what is your first movie memory?
My first movie memory, I've been thinking about this since I knew that we were going to be speaking, and I'm going to slightly cheat because there's two, but there's a very vague one when you don't really know if you've dreamt it or not, but there's a vague memory of my mum taking my sister and I to the old Plaza cinema in Truro in Cornwall, where we grew up. It was one of those really old school retro cinemas that thankfully still exists and has actually become slightly famous thanks to Mark Commode, who was a big fan of the Plaza in Truro. But it was very old, and we were sat at the top in the high seats, whatever you call them, and I vaguely remember watching Jungle Book. Now, this would have been a re-release because I would have been, 6 or 7, but at that time I didn't know anything about the fact that you re-release movies, and we just engaged with it and sung along with it as best we could. But that's my but it's so vague and foggy. But my kind of earliest big cinematic memory is when my dad took me to see Back to the Future 2. So my dad, bless him, has tinnitus. So when we used to go and visit him at weekends, he used to take me to the cinema and then sit in the car park and read a paper and wait for me to come out. So I started having these kind of cinema moments by myself really early on, which I guess is quite poignant when you think about it. But I remember him buying me my single ticket and me having to walk down to the front, and I was right at the front row. And how old would I have been? I probably 9 or 10, and just that was my first kind of proper big screen experience. I was a huge Back to the Future fan, even at a young age, and it stuck with me, which is why behind me there's a Back to the Future Playmobil set, which is slightly out of shot. And I was just so excited about seeing this film. I just loved Marty McFly. I don't know why. I was 9. I was just not even too clued up enough about it, but he was cool. He could skateboard. I couldn't skateboard. So I remember, in the UK, there was a really big thing. I imagine it's the same in the US with kind of movies hitting TV. And it was only a couple of Christmases before, maybe even that Christmas before, when Back to the Future had made it onto the TV. And I remember it was on the front of all the TV magazines, and it was like the first time we actually got to see it. It was before VHS rentals, and we watched that. And then so I was thrilled about going to see the second one. And actually, I don't remember much about the movie at all. I just remember going into the cinema, sitting down. And then my next memory is of when they played the trailer for the third one, because they shot them back to back. And it just blew me away that there was this, already they'd thought about the story and where he was going, and that I could watch the next one like in a year's time. And I remember just finding my way out of the cinema completely swamped. The cinema was totally full. And then having to find my dad in his car reading his newspaper. And that was it. That was kind of my launch into kind of film fandom, and I never really looked back.
So that's when you really, that moment of seeing the trailer post the film is when you realized that film was a craft. It was something that was created and thought about.
Yeah, I think I got really caught up in the story, and I was so excited the fact that there was another part of it and that the idea of them teasing it, I suppose it was a really early Easter egg, which we're all quite familiar with now. But yeah, I just couldn't wait to find out what was going on, and there were all these new characters, and it was in a different place. And I still rate Back to the Future 3 amongst one. It's still a good film in the trilogy for me, despite what my friends say. But yeah, it was a moment for me. And then yeah, there were lots of solo cinema trips after that, unfortunately for my dad.
Now that you're a parent, do you think maybe your dad enjoyed the break of you going to the cinema?
I think, yeah, it was tricky in the sense that we only saw my parents split up when I was about 10. So the weekends were quite special. So I imagine looking back on it now, he was probably happy that he was able to do something that I wasn't able to do when I was at home, and it was special. But at the same time, if it were me, I'd be like, it's 2 hours that I'm not going to spend with my son. So I imagine he was a little bit torn, but he's a very considerate man. And I think he would have just seen it as being a treat. It was one of those things that we were able to do. But yeah, I'm sure he just enjoyed reading the sports pages on a bench or in the car.
Did you talk to him about the film after you come out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would. And this is where I think he probably benefited from being slightly deaf in the left ear. So on the drive home, I would just be going, and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and I don't know why this happened, and I don't know what Doc Brown's going to do. But apparently there were some horses. And I could see in my mind's eye my dad just kind of nodding as he was driving. But little did he know that he was going to be on that journey with me for the next 20 years while I kind of made him record everything on the TV. And then I got really into comics, and he was surprisingly supportive of that. I think he saw them as an investment, as an ex-bank manager. But yeah, he was along for that journey with me, whether he liked it or not.
And do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a sister. Yeah, she's a couple of years younger than I am.
Did she start joining you at the movies?
We were very different growing up. There were a couple of films that we bonded on. Goonies. I think we probably watched Goonies every 2 weeks at my dad's house. Even my dad started to know the script and know what was about to happen. But no, if my sister came up with me, she would often spend the time with my dad and I would go solo. But yeah, we used to watch a lot of stuff together at home that my dad had recorded in between those 2 weeks. We used to phone him up. Dad, there's something on TV. It's 8:00. It's on this particular channel. He'd beaver off and record it. And he was so diligent and so sweet. He'd write it down and put it in a little notebook, and it was alphabetized. And yeah, we built up quite a little library thanks to his diligent recordings.
That's such a nice thing that he was able to do for you and bond over.
Yeah. And sometimes he'd go rogue and record stuff that we didn't ask for. And often they were the nice surprises. Like he'd grab a James Bond movie or something random that he'd come across in the newspaper. And sometimes he'd sit there and pause the adverts out, which is just, he wasn't even that interested in the film. And it was just even thinking about it now, it was very sweet of him.
Yeah, that is really sweet. And on television, did he watch with you?
Yeah, he would sit in the background, read the paper, and my sister and I would be watching something or playing in front of the TV with the movie on. And I remember thinking that there were movies that he would engage with more. Like he was always quite a big fan of the Goonies going on. I think he just enjoyed it. And there were a couple other films I think that he would pay attention to, but I think he just really enjoyed the environment that it created. And obviously this is a whole different conversation about kind of parental care and single parents and not seeing your dad. But I think for that moment, although that weekend, there was something quite special about everything just feeling quite normal. And I think looking back on it, I think that was quite special for him.
Yeah. And it's also to have something individual. Even parents in these conversations have different relationships with their kids and different way they bond over content with each one individually, or each parent has their own moments with their kids, which I think is a really nice thing. That's why I always ask about the rituals of what the family viewing is, because it's really intimate and beautiful and creates conversation and family time. The other question I ask a lot, and especially since your dad would go rogue and film movies maybe you wouldn't want to watch, do you think taste is nature or nurture?
Oh gosh, I think it's nature. I think I look back on thinking about what's in my iMovies library and the things that are on my Netflix and what have you. My father and I's tastes are very different. There's probably a very kind of small overlap. And I wouldn't even say my dad's a particular film buff because of him previously not being able to hear stuff and the age of when he grew up. No, I think the things that I'm into from a film point of view are very much my own, that I've developed over, 30 plus years.
Can't edit out that cough.
No, no.
Just kidding. As you got older, did you find that from middle school, teenage years, did you find a community around going to the movies or friends that you watch films at home with?
Yes. Outside of being with my dad, there was a group of us that would go to the movies. I remember one particular trip to going to see Seven. We all drove out to a different cinema out of town just because it was the only one that it was on. And that was back in the day, which I miss, when you didn't really know much about a film. You just knew, you'd seen the trailer, you might have read not even a review, but a kind of a preview piece of copy in Empire magazine or something, and you'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go and watch that. And we went to watch Seven, and we sat there in this kind of small cinema and just utterly blown away by it. And we all came out of the cinema and it was dark and it was raining. We all got into our individual cars and all drove home. And I don't think anyone said anything to each other until we saw each other at college a couple of days later. And it stayed with you. There was something very different about those kind of trips. And another one when we went to go and see something and it was full. And we ended up going to see Ace Ventura. And we didn't know what it was, had no idea. And there were four of us. And we just laughed so hard until our kind of side split. We'd never seen anything like it. We didn't know who this guy was. We weren't prepared for it. And they're very vivid, colourful memories of going with my friends. And then I ended up getting a job in a video rental store. And for about 2 years, I pretty much saw everything that came out. I was able to have stuff on in the store, which was great when it was quiet. But my friends would come and hang with me, and we'd maybe watch half of something and then half of something the next day, especially during the summer when it was dead and I was trapped in this video store. And I had keys, and we could go and rent and pull anything out. And for about two and a bit years while we were at college, there was a group of us that knew and had seen absolutely everything. And that kind of just carried on into college and into university. And yeah, I couldn't get away from it.
The person I had on yesterday was talking about how he would go to the video store, and it was actually the store clerk college kid that opened him up to all sorts of new cinema. He would go to rent something, and they're like, are you sure you want that?
Yeah.
And so were you that person? Did you help develop other kids' tastes when you were in that role?
Looking back on it, I'm surprised at how many people wanted your opinion. I think maybe they just assumed you'd seen it, but they really valued your kind of guidance. And my boss and I became very involved in picking the number of different copies of each film that he would pick. And he said, have you seen this? That was back when they were like £100 a tape or $100 a copy. And yeah, the amount of people that would come in, and you try and guide them one way or the other. And sometimes there was just nothing left because it was a Saturday night, and you'd see people take stuff home and you're like, yeah, that's not going to float your boat. Yeah. But it was a big store. He stocked an awful lot of stuff. And there was some unusual titles, or not non-mainstream, which was great. It was a very popular place. I loved that place.
And when did you know you wanted to work in the industry?
When I was in my teenage years, finishing college. So in the UK, we finished secondary school or high school, and then we do 2 years of college. And I rather naively did art, drama, and photography, thinking they're all fairly physical A-levels at the time, and they'd be great fun. And actually, the three of them compiled together, there was so much extra work involved in trying to make them all pay off that I had quite a stressful time at college trying to make it all work, to the point where I very nearly didn't. But I was desperate to try and do something creative. I used to love drawing, and I got really hooked into photography. And that was back when we did photography in a dark room, and we developed film and printed, and it was just that whole process. And then I had to do a history of photography course, and that led you down the really early stuff. And then you learnt about Edward Muybridge and the famous kind of horse footage, and then into film, and something just started to click. And that, learning about the background, and then being immersed in having all this content that I could access in the video store, it just felt like something I really wanted to get into. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I'm pretty sure I wanted to do animation. I loved the idea of drawing and making something move. But it wasn't until I actually got to film and animation school that I realized how hard it was and actually how diligent and talented you have to be to make that work. And it was university that taught me that actually I still wanted to be in the industry, but animation was not going to be something that I was going to.
Yeah. And how much classic cinema, classic animation did you explore while you were in the video store?
It's funny. I'm not sure how much classic films in the video store. I was probably a bit of a sucker and watched all the new stuff. It wasn't until you reach a lazy Sunday afternoon where you might pick something a little bit random. Even now, I'm quite bad at, I have to really force myself into new areas. If there's nothing on TV or something I can't find to watch, I'm quite comfortable kind of going back to something that I've seen a lot rather than explore something new. I have to really force myself out of my comfort zone, and then I'm fine. And then I'm like, oh, I'm into this. This is great. And I think it was too easy in the video store just to sling something on that I didn't really need to pay too much attention to. I remember watching Brazil. I brought it home one night. I'd read about it. I read about how strange it is. But again, it was slightly science fiction-y, and that kind of appealed to me. And I remember watching that and thinking, that's just bonkers. And it inspired me a little to break out of my comfort zone a little bit more. There were definitely moments where I'd take something back and just watch it one evening just to explore it. But university was a bit more of a broadening of education from a film perspective.
You didn't grow up in the US. Were most of your mainstream films American, or were a lot of them more local to the UK?
No, I would say it was probably 3/4 mainstream American movies, Hollywood movies. In the 90s, there was mid-90s, I would say, when there was this big kind of Brit culture uprising. That's when you started to get train spotting, and other films of that genre that I can't remember. There was loads of that kind of burst onto the scene, which is very exciting. So late 90s, 96, 97, that was when I was in art school. So there was loads of that kind of lower budget UK-based film funded film out there that you could really get into that was more, that kind of bridged that gap between mainstream and being slightly more art house. But then that bubble slightly burst, and then everything went back to being a little bit more Hollywood. But university did teach me to explore other things. We did a lot of cinema studies, and I remember watching a really early film called something about Bag of Cherries. It's a residing memory of mine where the lecturer had tracked the people within this stage. It was a silent film, and he believed the way that the people moved within the stage was an underlying meaning of the kind of the characters and their struggles. I was a bit naive at that time at university, and I just didn't buy into it. I was like, I can't believe that back then, when they literally had one camera that would barely work, that the director had thought about their space from a bird's eye view and how they moved within the stage, and then to read meaning into that. And actually, I remember it really bugged me. I felt like he was layering something onto this that didn't exist. And I wrote an essay basically just countering it and saying I just didn't agree with it. And looking back now, I think maybe there's something more interesting there that I dismissed. But I think there is a tendency in those classes sometimes to read into a lot of stuff that isn't there.
Let's talk about kids and introducing your kid. How old is your children?
So we've got one little boy. He's called Mac. We'll get his name out of the way. He's 7. So he's on a really fascinating little journey. I was really thinking about this the other night, and I think a lot of where he is at now with his kind of love of, let's just say, broadly film, although obviously he watches other things. He's not like some sort of complete film nerd at 7 years old. A lot of it has stemmed from the age and where he was when the pandemic hit. And I'm sure it's not a unique story, but he just turned 4 when the pandemic hit us in the UK, the end of March. And at the time, both my wife and I, full-time jobs, both within the creative industry, both fairly demanding, both absolutely used to being in studios or in places with people. And people just didn't know how to handle this kind of working from home, like overnight. And you had a 4-year-old who hadn't started school. He was still in nursery or preschool. He was due to start in that September. So he was of an age where he would entertain himself to a point, but he would need engagement. You couldn't just plonk him in front of something or give him an iPad or whatever. He needed playing with. He was interested. He wanted to come and engage. So we didn't really know how to juggle this particular situation. And Mac was never particularly interested in the really young infant TV, the singing, the dancing, the bright characters, the inane songs, the nursery rhymes. Weirdly, we never really had many nursery rhymes in the house. It was always just music as and when it occurred. So he needed kind of something slightly different to engage him. And we just didn't want him to just be watching these kind of bright, colourful things on YouTube for hours on end. He became fascinated with cars and trucks like all little boys do. Or a lot of little boys do, I should say. If you templated a little boy, Mac is that little boy. Sport, cars, animals, all that kind of stuff. And of course, there was no sport because it was the pandemic. And so he got really into monster trucks, and he was really into his monster trucks. We were ordering kind of Matchbox cars daily. Again, you were just doing anything you could to just make it through the day and the week, because there was 3 months of lockdown from March until June, which is when his nursery finally reopened. So cars took us to YouTube, which we have a love-hate relationship with, and we've walked away from it since. But it was cars, and then that led us to boats and tanks, and then he got really into kind of the whole army thing. He just loved the vehicles. He just wanted to watch the vehicles. And then one day, I think we just run out of things to do, and we put on, and I'm going to be judged, we put on the movie Battleship that came out a few years ago. I should point out, finger actively hovering over the Apple remote, looking for anything that shouldn't be. But he was just absorbed by the mechanical side of things. He wasn't at all remotely scared, or I wouldn't even say he was that excited. He just wanted to watch the boats. He just wanted to watch the things move and the things engage. He wasn't worried about the aliens. It was the whole kind of mechanical thing. And he just became just fascinated with all things in motion, whether it be particularly cars and boats. And that got him really into wanting to watch things about World War, because he knew his great granddad had been in the World War. And so he's 4, he can engage, he can explain what he's interested in. So we went down this path of and that became movies where he could watch that kind of, I use the term action loosely, but that kind of motion. There was excitement, there were vehicles, maybe there were planes, maybe there were boats. And then all of a sudden we realized that there were loads of films that we could put on with the volume on low and just skip through stuff. And he just loved it. And one of the films that he would actively ask for was A Bridge Too Far. Now, I should also point out there's a lot of stuff in A Bridge Too Far that isn't suitable for a 4-year-old, but there's a scene in The Bridge Too Far where Sean Connery is gathering his troops, and they all get in the gliders as the planes take the gliders over the channel to Holland. And I swear, I think we've watched that one scene 100 times. He was fascinated. And then when they crashed, he was like, why did they crash? Where was that? And then there were other parts of The Bridge Too Far where the tanks just go on down the road and they can't get to Holland. And we would just skip through, and there were chapters, and we would watch Bridge Too Far in about kind of 20 minutes, and then we go back and we'd have to do it again. And then it became this thing where wherever we could find suitable, loosely, movies that had interesting scenes or interesting kind of motion and cars and that kind of thing, we watched Fast and Furious with the volume down.
I showed my son, who also is a templated boy. I would add dinosaurs to our list.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
But I showed him the scene from Speed where the bus had to jump over the thing. Yeah. Oh, he was just so mouth agape looking at it. And also the scene of Jurassic Park where they first see the dinosaurs. It's 5 minutes, 6 minutes clip. That I've been doing clips like that too. It's very, very interesting kind of what they engage with.
Yes. Gosh, I can't believe I've forgotten dinosaurs. So we found ourselves doing Jurassic Park again in little chunks here and there, avoiding the kind of the really terrifying bits. But then he used to just get really annoyed with us that we were skipping stuff. And he knew it wasn't, he claims, he knew it wasn't real. He just wanted to see the dinosaurs. He knew the dinosaurs didn't exist. He knew they had died out. So for him, his train of thought is they're not real, so it's okay. So we never had any kind of moments of terror. He just wanted this content. He just wanted this kind of engagement, and he would name all the dinosaurs. So yeah, we've done all of the Jurassic Park stuff.
I accidentally had the T-Rex scene on one, like, because we were playing and I didn't stop it in time, and I was like, oh, so nervous, and he just looks at the screen and goes, rah!
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I think we worried unnecessarily. He's fairly well balanced, and who knows what will happen in 10 years, but he just loves it. He understands that there are characters there. He likes the story. He wants to know what's going to happen. He wants to know what's going to happen with the people. So I think that's the really interesting part, is when it stopped being pictures and kind of action scenes, and he started to string them together. And he wanted to know how person A got from that part to that part. It wasn't just enough to skip. And obviously he's not Fast and Furious and paying attention and really getting all the script, etc. But when he got a bit older, things like Jurassic Park, he said, no, he wanted to understand that story arc, and you couldn't skip it. And we were like, we're in this now, so we just got to see how it pans out.
How old was he when he started to crave this story?
It was probably when he was 5. So post-pandemic, he'd done his first year at school, which was challenging to start school in the pandemic when everything was just so weird. But they introduced a great deal more reading. I don't think we were great in hindsight doing the reading in early days. And I think that introduced him more to the sense of story. Now he's still learning to read, but he really wants to engage with it. And I've seen him try and pour into books that are probably slightly out of his age range. He wants that character. And I think that came about off the back of school.
Have you introduced him to Harry Potter?
Oh, Harry Potter. We are deep into Potter. We've done all 8 films, I should say. We literally finished Deathly Hallows Part 2 about a week ago. And that was, fun enough, one of those rare occasions where my wife and I were doing faces at each other, because it's pretty intense, even to the point where my wife was like, had that kind of face on her where she's, my goodness, even though she knows how it's going to end. And I could see Mac, and it's like under his blanket, and he's got one of his soft guys with him, and the minute he finished, he took the control and just went back to Chamber of Secrets and just pressed play again. It was like, cool, I need this again. And we've done the first book and we're into the second one, and that's the book that he's trying to read himself, which is like the most adorable thing. And he's going through these different kind of franchises, I suppose. We dabbled with Marvel, and he enjoys a bit of Star Wars, but
the first full movie you showed him.
Yes, I can never remember the name of the film. It's the Pixar one with the 2 elf brothers who bring back their half dad, and it's just the guy with the legs. We need to figure out what the name of it is, and I needed to remind myself what it was. I meant to do that before I spoke to you, because it's a story that kind of is particularly close to my heart. Onward, yeah. So the first film that we watched from beginning to end at the cinema was Onward. And it was, again, one of those rare occasions where it was post-pandemic and we'd seen the trailer, and he just really liked the look of it. And I must admit, it really appealed to me. And we took him to the cinema, and he sat on my lap, and it was the first cinema experience that I'd had with him. And then Onward's such a strong kind of father and son story. I blubbed. I was like, I couldn't handle it. There was me with him on my lap. It was the first time out. It was the first cinema experience. It was post-pandemic, when the older brother hugs his dad and the younger brother can't see him. And then, and there was a brief moment in the middle of it where Mac ran off because he needed to go to the bathroom. And I thought, we might have lost him. It's 45 minutes. It's quite a long time. And I could see him just running back up the stairs and just clambered back on, and he didn't move again until it was finished. And we still revisit Onward, even in kind of chunks here and there, and we listen to the theme tune and the song quite a lot. Yeah, it was quite a poignant moment in our lives from the past couple of years.
And did you do any animation for him when he was little at home?
Yeah, so even now he loves to draw and colour, and he will brief me into what he wants to colour, and I will have to go and draw it and print it out and then give it to him. We're not allowed to Google it. I have to draw it, which is actually like one of my favourite things. And it reminds me that how much I still like drawing as well. Sometimes the briefs are pretty tricky, and especially when they're vehicles from very specific points of view. But yeah, we still do that, and we do it together, and we try and. It sounds like all we do is, as a family, is just watch TV, but we try and balance it out. And he's recently got really into what he's called crafting, which is just modeling and painting and making stuff from all sorts of stuff. We're kind of really embracing that. But yes, I will do doodles or drawing or black and white pictures for him to color, or we'll do it together. Yeah, it's a nice thing to be able to do.
And do you find that the story worlds that he's engaged with the film and have helped his imagination?
I've really seen it recently, actually. Another thing that we did during the pandemic is we got really hooked into Lego. It became a real thing that we could do together, and it reignited my love for it. And I've seen him over the course of the past year, instead of just making the models, pulling them apart and building his own worlds. And whereas he used to wake up early and then the first thing he would do is come and wake us up. He's now in that lovely place where he'll wake up and play and do his own thing in his room, whether it be with Lego or Transformers or toys or whatever. And that kind of side of him has really developed, I think, over the past 12 months. I think he's gone through a real developmental spurt, which has involved him really understanding that kind of story and telling stories and telling tales. And he'll always want to reiterate the adventure that this particular character has gone on when you come up to his room. Or there's definitely something there that is growing.
That's great. And then before I ask my last question, is your father still with you? Is he still?
Yes.
Around? Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure before I ask this question.
No, totally.
Have you invited him in to watch movies with you guys, with your family?
So when they come up and visit, we'll watch stuff together. And Mac and my father have got a really lovely relationship. And he'll sit down with my dad and they'll watch something on the sofa. And he's almost better at engaging with it now with Mac than he was with me. And that's not to say he didn't know what we were up to. I just think he found it hard to connect, but I think Mac's broken that down. I think my dad's in a different place in his life as well. So yeah, they'll watch stuff together. They'll watch cricket together. They'll watch sport together. There's a real kind of sharing of that moment. So yes, that's really lovely.
Yeah. I feel like grandparents, because they don't actually have to parent, they can enjoy your kid purely.
Yeah, 100%. It's really lovely. Matt will kind of point things out and he'll be like, oh, that's happening because of this. And my dad will ask questions and there'll be a kind of a really lovely dialogue between the two of them. Yeah, it's quite special to watch when it's able to happen.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw you my last question, which is, okay. What movie should I show my son, Miles, as he grows to fall in love with cinema?
I knew this question was coming. I thought about it a lot and I was trying to come up with an answer that wasn't so obvious to me, but I think I just wasn't being truthful to myself. And I still think everyone should watch Back to the Future. It's just, and it's probably not very original, but it's just such a film of its time. And I think it's very special.
I had one other guest who also has shown each of his 4 children Back to the Future as one of their first films. And I obviously need to ask you, have you shown your son Back to the Future yet?
Yes. However, we had to do it in chunks. I think although the second time we revisited it, he was a lot more into it. I think he's not quite at the age where he can pick up on the dynamic and the back and forth between Marty and Biff and the other characters and Doc, but he definitely is aware of it. He gets annoyed the fact that I bought the Playmobil Back to the Future advent calendar and he's not allowed to play with it. So he's very aware of it as a thing. I'd be lying if I said we've watched it from beginning to end. But yeah, we went to a car festival the other day and there was a DeLorean there. And he said, Daddy, it's the car from your favorite film. And I was like,
well, at least he knows. And maybe there'll be like a rooftop cinema or a summer cinema where they show it again, so he can experience it with you the way you saw it.
I'd love that. Yeah, we're very lucky where we live. They do cinemas in open air cinemas and cinema in the local museum. So if that happens, I should definitely be keeping my eye out. That's a really lovely idea. But yeah, I'm sorry it's not more original, but it's something that's close to my heart.
I didn't think of Back to the Future actually as one of the movies on my list for my son, and then now that It's been brought up twice. I am definitely going to revisit it. And the other thing that I think is really fun in terms of imagination is just the idea and concept of time travel as something that, as a discussion point, as a jumping off point for imagination and good stories that we come up with. I think that in itself is worth showing the film.
For what it's worth, my second one was The Incredibles.
I was the mom once by accident for Halloween. I dressed up and everyone's like, "You were for Incredibles?" And I was like, "Sure."
Yeah, that was one of those films that came out when I was really, really trying to get into that specific industry. And it's very cool.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your child's film education with me. I really appreciate you being on my podcast.
Not at all. It's an absolute pleasure. I hope people don't judge my Battleship viewing too harshly.
I love it. I think it's so great that everyone comes from a different perspective on what they're showing their kids. And as if you get a chance to listen to some of the episodes, it might even share some ideas, comfort. Nobody quite knows what they're doing. These conversations haven't really been had. It's been so fun to hear, and I'm so honored that people are sharing what they're doing in the privacy of their home with their family, with me, and so publicly, because nobody really knows. And a lot of it is trying to just share passion with our kids and help expose them to new things. And it's been
absolutely.
It has been super fun. So there's definitely no judgment, at least from me.
No, it's been great. Thank you, Jessica.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.